Mesdames et messieurs, chers...
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 102 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders and pursuant to the order reference of Monday, April 24th, 2023. The committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-27, an act to enact the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, and the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act to make consequential and related amendments to other acts. I'd like to welcome our witnesses today, Anna Branduszewsku, AI governance researcher from McGill University, and also Alexandre Shi, industry expert and coming co-chair of Future Work Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence by video conference. Welcome. From Digital Public, we have Bianca Wiley. Thank you for being here. And finally, from the International Association of Privacy Professionals, we have Ashley Kassovan, Managing Director, AI Government Center. Thank you very much for all of you for being with you.
For 5 minutes to Madame Branduszewsku.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Ms. Anna Branduszewsku. I research the governance of AI technologies in government. In my brief with public participation and AI expert Dr. Renee Sieber, we argue that the ADA is a missed opportunity for shared prosperity. Shared prosperity is an economic concept where the benefits of innovation are distributed equitably among all segments of society. Innovation is taken out of the hands of the few, in this case the AI industry, to the hands of the many. Today I will present 4 problems and 3 recommendations from our brief. The first problem is that the ADA implies but does not ensure shared prosperity. The preamble of the bill states, and I quote, "Whereas trust in the digital and data-driven economy is key to ensuring its growth and fostering a more inclusive and prosperous Canada," end quote. Yet what we see is a concentration of wealth in the AI industry, especially big tech companies, which does not guarantee that the prosperity will trickle down to Canadians. Being data-driven can just as easily equal mass data surveillance and more opportunities to monetize data. Trust, too, can be easily conflated in Canada with social acceptance of AI, telling people over and over that AI is invariably good. You may have heard of the phrase, show, don't tell. Repeating that AI is beneficial will not convince marginalized people who are subject to AI harms, for example, false arrests. AI harms were extensively covered by the Canadian parliamentary study titled Facial Recognition Technology and the Growing Power of AI. The second problem is the ADA's centralization of power to ISED and the Minister of Industry. The current setup is prone to regulatory capture. We cannot trust ISED, an agency placed in the position of both promoting and regulating AI with no independent oversight for the ADA to ensure shared prosperity. Agencies placed in these dual roles and responsibilities, such as nuclear regulatory agencies, are often incompatible and inevitably favor commercial interests over accountability of AI development. The third problem is that public consultation is absent. To date, there has been no demonstrable public consultation on the ADA. Tech policy expert Christelle Tessono and many others have raised this concern in their briefs and in articles. ISED's consultation process thus far has been selective, and many civil society and labor organizations were largely excluded from consultation on drafting of the ADA. The fourth problem is that the ADA does not include workers' rights. Workers in Canada and globally cannot share in prosperity when their working conditions to develop AI systems include surveillance in the workplace and mental health crises. Researchers have extensively documented the exploitative nature of AI systems development on data workers. For instance, the huge toll on their mental health, even leading to suicide. In 2018, I learned from digital governance expert Nanjira Sambuli about Sama, a Silicon Valley company that works for big tech and hires data workers all over the world, including Kenya. The contracts Sama held with Facebook, Meta, and OpenAI have been found to traumatize workers. We have also seen many cases of IP theft of creators, as AI governance expert Blair Adder-Frost has written in their brief on generative AI. To share in the prosperity promised by AI, we propose 3 recommendations. First, we need a redraft of the ADA outside of ISED to ensure public and private sector accountability. Multiple departments and agencies already involved in work on responsible AI need to co-create the ADA for the private and the public sector and prevent the use of harmful technologies. This version of the ADA would hold companies like Palantir accountable, as well as national security and law enforcement agencies. Second, we need AI legislation to incorporate robust workers' rights. Worker protection means unions, lawsuits, and safe spaces for whistleblowers. Kenyan data workers unionized and sued Meta due to the company's exploitative working conditions, with the Supreme Court ruling in their favor. Canada can follow the lead of the Kenyan government in listening to its workers. Similarly, American workers from the actors' union strike prevented production companies from deciding when they could use and not use AI, showing that workers can indeed drive regulation. Beyond unions and strikes, workers need safe and confidential channels to report harms. That is why whistleblower protection is essential to workers' rights and responsible AI. Third and lastly, we need meaningful public participation. Government has a responsibility to protect its people and ensure shared prosperity. A strong legislative framework demands meaningful public participation. Participation will actually drive innovation, not slow it down, because the public will tell us what's right for Canada. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Branducescu.
Thank you very much, Ms. Branducescu. I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Shi for 5 minutes.
Members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Alexandre Shi. I'm the incoming co-chair of the Future of Work and Global Partnership on AI, of which Canada is a member state, an executive at a multinational AI company, a lawyer in good standing, an investor and advisor to AI companies, as well as the proud father of 2 boys. Today, I'll speak exclusively on Part 3, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, as well as the recently proposed amendments. I believe we should pass the Act. However, it needs significant amendments beyond those currently proposed. In fact, the Act fails to address a key portion of the AI supply chain, data collection, annotation, and engineering, which represents 80% of the work done in AI. In fact, this 80% of the work is manually done by humans. Failing to require disclosures on the AI supply chain will lead to bias, low quality of AI models, and privacy issues, and more importantly, the violation of the human rights of millions of people on a daily basis. Recent amendments have addressed some of the deficiencies in the Act by including certain steps in the AI supply chain, as well as requiring the preservation of records of the data used. However, the law does not consider the AI development process as a supply chain with millions of people involved in powering AI system. No disclosure mechanism is put in place to ensure that Canadians are able to make informed decisions on the AI systems they choose, ensuring that they're fair, high quality, and respect human rights. If I unpack that statement, there are 3 takeaways that I hope to leave you with. 1, the Act as drafted does not regulate the largest portion of AI system, data collection, annotation, and engineering. Failing to address this fails to protect human rights for millions of people, including vulnerable Canadians, and in turn leads to low quality artificial intelligence systems. The Act can help protect those involved in the AI supply chain and empower people to choose high quality and fair artificial intelligence solutions if it is enacted with disclosure requirements. Let me dive deeper into all these 3 points and with additional detail on why these considerations are relevant for the future iteration of the Act. Self-regulation in the AI supply chain is not working. The lack of regulatory framework and disclosures of the data collection, annotation, and engineering aspects of the AI supply chain is having a negative impact on millions of lives today. In fact, these people are mostly in the global south, but also include vulnerable Canadians. There is currently a race to the bottom, meaning that basic human rights are being disregarded to diminish costs. In a recent well-documented investigative journalism piece featured in Wired magazine, titled "Underage Workers Are Trading AI," and published on November 15th, 2023, a 15-year-old Pakistani child describes working on tasks to train AI models that pay as little as 1 cent, and even in higher paying jobs, the amount of time he needs to spend doing unpaid research means that he needs to work between 5 or 6 hours to complete an hour of real-time work, all to earn $2. He is quoted as saying, "It's digital slavery." His statement echoes similar reporting done by journalists and in-depth studies of the AI supply chain by academics from around the world and international organizations such as the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. However, while these abuses are well documented, They're currently part of the back end of the AI development process, and Canadian firms, consumers, and governments interacting with AI systems do not have a mechanism to make informed choices about abuse-free systems. Requiring disclosures and eventually banning certain practices will help avoid a race to the bottom in the data enrichment and validation industry and enable Canadians to have better, safer AI that does not violate human rights. If we borrow from the recently passed legislation, Bill S-211, Canada's Modern Slavery Act, creating disclosure obligations helps foster more resilient supply chains and offers Canadians products free from forced or child labor. Transparent and accountable supply chains have helped respect human rights in countless industries, including the garment industry, the diamond industry, and agriculture, only to name a few. The information requirements in the Act could include information on data enrichment, specifically how data is collected and or labeled, a general description of labeling instructions and whether it was done using identifiable employees or contractors, procurement practices that include human rights standards, and validating that steps have been taken that no child or forced labor was used in the process. Companies already prepare instructions for all aspects of the AI supply chain. The disclosure would formalize what is already common practice. Furthermore, there are options in the AI supply chain that create high-quality jobs that respect human rights. The Canadian government should immediately require these disclosures as part of its own procurement processes of AI systems. But having a disclosure mechanism would also be a complement to the audit authority bestowed on the minister under the Act. Creating equivalent reporting obligations on the AI supply chain would augment the current law and ensure that quality, transparency, and respect of human rights is part of AI development. It will allow Canadians to benefit from innovative solutions that are better, safer, and aligned with our values. I hope that you'll consider the proposal today. You can have a positive impact on millions of lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shi. I'll now yield the floor to Madame Wiley for 5 minutes.
My name is Bianca Wiley, and I work in public interest digital governance as a partner at Digital Public. I've worked at both a tech startup and a multinational, and I've also worked in the design, development, and support of public consultations for governments and government agencies. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about ADA. As far as amendments go, my suggestion would be to wholesale strike ADA from Bill C-27. Let's not minimize both the feasibility of this amendment nor the strong case before us to do so. I'm here to hold this committee accountable to the false sense of something is better than nothing on this file. It's not, and you're the ones standing between the Canadian public and further legitimizing this undertaking, which is making a mockery of democracy and legislative process. ADA is a complexity ratchet. It's a nonsensical construct detached from reality, building increasingly intricate castles of legislation in the sky. It's thinking on AI that is detached from operations, from deployment, and from context. ICID's work in ADA highlights how open to hijack our democratic norms are when you wave around the shiny orb of innovation and technology. As Dr. Lucy Suckman writes, AI works through a strategic vagueness that serves the interest of its promoters. As those that are uncertain about it, popular media commentators, policymakers, and publics are left to assume that others know what it is. I hope you might refuse to continue a charade that has had spectacular carriage through the House of Commons on the back of this social psychological phenomenon of assuming that someone else knows what's going on here. That this committee has continued to support a minister basically legislating on the fly. How are we writing laws like this? What is quality control at the Department of Justice? Or is it just that we'll do this on the fly when it's tech, as though this is some kind of thoughtful, adaptive approach to law? No. The process of ADA reflects the very meaning of law becoming nothing more than a political prop. The case to pause on ADA and reroute it to a new and separate process begins at its beginning. If we want to regulate artificial intelligence, we have to have a coherent why. We have never received a coherent why for ADA from this government. Have you, as members of this committee, received an adequate backstory procedurally on ADA? Who created the urgency? How was it drafted? From what perspective? What work was done inside government to think about this issue across existing government mandates? If we were to take this bill out to the general public for thoughtful discussion, a process that ICID actively avoided doing, it would fall apart under the scrutiny. Use of AI in a medical setting versus use on a manufacturing production floor versus use in an educational setting versus use in a restaurant versus use to plan bus routes versus use to identify water pollution versus use in a daycare. I could do this all day. All of these create real potential harms and benefits. Instead of having those conversations, we're carrying some kind of delusion that we can control and categorize how something as generic as advanced computational statistics, which is what AI is, will be used in reality, in deployment, in context. The people that can help us have those conversations are not and have never been in these rooms. ADA was created by a highly insular, extremely small circle of people, tiny. When there is no high-order friction in a policy conversation, we're talking to ourselves. Taking public engagement on AI seriously would force rigor. By getting away with this emergency and urgency narrative, ICID is diverting all of us from the grounded contextual thinking that has also been an omission in both privacy and data protection thought. That thinking, as seen again in ADA, continues to deepen and solidify power asymmetries. We're making the same mistake again for a third time. This is a keep things exactly the same, only faster bill. If this bill were law tomorrow, nothing substantial would happen, which is exactly the point. It's an abstract piece of theater, disconnected from Canada's geopolitical economic location and from the irrational exuberance of the venture capital and investment community. This law is riding on the back of investor enthusiasm for an industry that has not even proven its business model out. On top of that, it's an industry that is highly dependent on the private infrastructures of a handful of US companies. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je passerai maintenant la parole.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass the floor to Ashley Cassovan for 5 minutes.
To participate in this important study, specifically to discuss ADA, the component of the Digital Charter Implementation Act. I'm here today in my capacity as the Managing Director of IIPP's AI Governance Center. AIPP is a global, nonprofit, policy-neutral organization dedicated to the professionalization of the privacy and AI governance workforces. For context, we have 82,000 members located in 150 countries with over 300 employees. Our policy neutrality is rooted in the idea that no matter what the rules are, we need people to do the work of putting them into practice. This is why we make one exception to our neutrality. We advocate for the professionalization of our field. My position at IIPP builds on nearly a decades-long effort to establish responsible and meaningful policy and standards for data and AI. Previously, I served as Executive Director for the Responsible AI Institute. Prior, I worked at Treasury Board Secretariat, leading the first version of the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems, which I'm now happy to be seen included in the amendments of this bill. I also serve as co-chair for Standard Council of Canada's AI and Data Standards Collaborative and contribute to various national and international AI governance efforts. As such, I'm happy to address any questions you may have about ADA in my personal capacity. While I have always had a strong interest in ensuring technology is built and governed in the best interests of society, on a personal note, I am now a new mom to 7-month-old twins. This experience has brought up new questions for me about how we will raise children in an AI-enabled society. Will their safety be compromised if we post photos of them on social media? Are the surveillance on social media? Are there surveillance technologies commonly used at daycares compromising? Etc. With this, I believe that providing safeguards for AI is imperative now more than ever. Recent market research has demonstrated that the AI market size has doubled since 2021 and is expected to grow from around $2 billion in 2023 to nearly $2 trillion in 2030. This not only demonstrates the potential impact of AI on society, but the pace at which it's growing. This committee has heard from various experts about challenges related to the increased adoption of AI, and as a result, improvements that could be made to ADA. While the recently tabled amendments address some of these concerns, the reality is that the general adoption of AI is still new, and these technologies are being used in diverse and innovative ways in almost every sector. Creating perfect legislation that will address all the potential impacts of AI in one bill is difficult, even if it accurately reflects the current state of AI development. It is hard to create a single, long-lasting framework that will remain relevant as these technologies continue to change rapidly. One way of retaining relevance when governing complex technologies is through standards, which is already reflected in ADA. The inclusion of future agreed-upon standards and assurance mechanisms seems likely, in my experience, to help ADA remain agile as AI evolves. To complement this concept, one additional safeguard being considered in similar policy discussions around the world is the provision of an AI officer or designated AI governance role. We feel the inclusion of such a role could both improve ADA and help to ensure that its objectives will be implemented given the dynamic nature of AI. Ensuring appropriate training and capabilities of these individuals will address some of the concerns that have been raised through this review process, specifically on what compliance will look like given the use of AI in different contexts with different degrees of impact. This concept is both aligned with international trends and requirements in other industries, such as privacy and cybersecurity. Privacy law in British Columbia and Quebec include the provision of a responsible privacy officer to effectively oversee implementation of privacy policy. Additionally, we see recognition of the important role that people play in the recent AI executive order in the United States. It requires each agency to designate a chief artificial intelligence officer who shall hold primary responsibility for managing their agency's use of AI. A similar approach was proposed in a recent private member's bill in the UK on the regulation of AI, which would require any business which develops, deploys, or uses AI to designate an AI officer to ensure the safe, ethical, unbiased, and non-discriminatory use of AI by the business. History has shown that when professionalization is not sufficiently prioritized, a daunting expertise gap can emerge. As an example, ISC Squared's 2022 Cyber Workforce Study discusses the growing cyber workforce gap. According to the report, there are 4.7 million cybersecurity professionals globally, but there is still a gap of 3.4 million cybersecurity workers required to address enterprise needs. We believe that without concerted effort to upskill professionals in parallel fields, we will face a similar shortfall in AI governance and a dearth of professionals to implement AI responsibly in line with C27 and other legislative objectives. Finally, in a recent survey that we conducted at IAPP on AI governance, 74% of respondents identified that they are currently using AI or intend to within the next 12 months. However, 33% of respondents cited a lack of professional training and certification for AI governance professionals, and 31% cited a lack of qualified AI governance professionals as key challenges to the effective rollout and operation of AI governance programs. Legislative recognition and incentivization of the need for knowledgeable professionals would help ensure organizations resource their AI governance programs effectively to do the work. In sum, we believe that rules for AI will emerge. Perhaps more importantly, we need professionals to put those rules into practice. History has shown early investment in a professionalized workforce pays dividends later. To this end, as part of our written submission, we will provide potential legislative text to be included in ADA for your consideration. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And to start the discussion, I'll yield the floor to MP Perkins for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wiley, so the minister talked a lot about 300 consultations after he tabled the bill, not before. And in looking at that list which he provided after we asked for it, I see that 28 were with academics and 216 with basically big business and not really with people who are impacted or have done any. Now, so sort of the converted talking to the converted. So I'd like you to talk a little more, if you could, expand on your belief about why you think a proper consultation with this bill defeated and reintroduced in a new format would produce a better result.
Certainly, thank you. I think even with academics, they're not working in operations. So the reason I listed the examples I gave is because I think AI starts to make sense when we talk about it in a specific context, as mentioned, in manufacturing, in healthcare, dentist's office. I mean, we could go through all of society here. So we need to talk to the people that are working in those spaces, not general specialists. I mean, this is what I mean. We're having even within the critics, people have a vested interest in going way down into the complexity instead of us going out and looking at this, to zoom out and say, why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? And the answers to those questions are going to be very different per sector. What looks beneficial and harmful per sector is a totally different thing. So I think that's why we need to restart the conversation from the point of, what are we trying to do here? Then you can talk about how you do it. You can't start how you do it before you're getting your why clear.
This bill outlines, which was a bolt-on to a previously failed privacy bill, is driven by trying to imitate what's going on in Europe.
Yeah.
But it basically says, we're going to legislate harms, the highest level of harms in AI, and it's already sort of failed to define it well because the minister's already had to revise his definition. But is the highest risk harms the only harms that are potential out there? And what are all the levels? Like, there are various levels of AI that can impact people besides the highest level that they're legislating.
Absolutely. Two things on this point. One of them is harm is always contextual, always. Something can seem absolutely safe, so to speak, in terms of, say, data collection. Your doctor has it, then you turn around and someone else has it. It's dangerous. It's never absent context and use, ever. So I would argue that structural categorization is incorrect. And the reason, when we look to Europe all the time and say, what's Europe doing? And though I know it's appealing to say, what are they doing over there? Maybe that's thoughtful. Geopolitically, from an economic perspective, they want their own Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. So when you gin up all this complexity, you protect your national industry. So this is a way to enable the economy to grow based on domestic rules. And then there's that broad harmonization conversation you're hearing. How well has that worked to date globally with data protection law? It has not. It has not worked with privacy either. So those are the two pieces of a response to that.
We've had a lot of discussion here about the first two parts of the bill, about whether or not privacy is a fundamental right, human right, and whether or not this bill, in spite of the late stage 11th hour conversion of the minister to recognizing that, has still got a lot of exceptions in here that give the paramount authority to business to override the fundamental right. But in the ADA bill, there's no mention of human rights, personal privacy, anything else. But there is mention of creating a super ministry of undefined power and undefined regulation at ISED to rule it all. What's an alternative to having one major Ottawa super agency who thinks they can rule the entire AR world in Canada? What's the alternative?
At least one alternative, which is why I keep going back. The groundwork and the homework for this bill was not done, because even before you go out to the public, you go within the government and ask, if this is the problem we're seeing that we had in banking, that we had in healthcare, that we had in automobiles, we start from there. And then we think, what do we do next from an adaptive perspective? We don't reinvent the world in the name of artificial intelligence. It's disrespectful to the existing status of the government, of democracy, and of accountability. So I think you at least start there. When things don't fall into there, then let's get specific and regulate. Then let's get specific and talk about accountability. But we don't start building the world around artificial intelligence here and ignoring everything else that came before.
So should any future legislation sort of outline what all the levels, as we know it, of artificial intelligence are, from the repetitive task stuff that gets done as a business computer efficiency right through?
I genuinely don't think that this is the right approach from a structural question perspective, because artificial intelligence, if you want to break it down to it's pattern matching, it's advanced statistics.
Right.
We didn't regulate mathematics. We didn't regulate statistics. We didn't regulate databases. We didn't regulate general software. I don't think the software industry did badly without general regulation. So it's just to say this.
That reminds me, this is a question I've been meaning to ask, haven't been able to ask anyone yet. We have not regulated any level of computing power yet in the world. But we are here, or trying to. Why?
Industry. Capital is looking for the next place to go, and as I'm only saying this because the business model isn't even proven out yet. You know who knows they're making money? Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Every other startup that is riding on the back of those companies, let's talk about where they are in 2 years. We're legislating for that context, which is novel and has not arrived yet, and that's actually the driving feature here. Make it make sense, please.
Well, I know that.
Thank you very much, MP Perkins. I'll now yield the floor to MP Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The one thing that I'm enjoying very much about this committee is the divergent perspectives that we're hearing and the level of engagement and level of intelligence that is approaching the issue. But the reality is that the genie is out of the bottle, and my concern is that we're not going to go back to where we were before. So my first question then is to Ms. Kazovan. On April 23rd, in April 2023, you and 75 other researchers co-signed a letter calling on the government to move forward with artificial intelligence data with the Act, and that further postponing the Act would be out of sync with the speed in which technology is being developed. Now, is your position the same today as when you co-signed that letter?
Yeah, I would note that I did that in my former capacity as Executive Director of the Responsible AI Institute. I still continue to serve on the board of the Responsible AI Institute, so I'll share this in that capacity, given the policy neutrality of my current position. That said, yes, I definitely do believe that. I think that, as you mentioned, the genie is out of the bottle. I have a lot of respect for Bianca and the perspective. I do think that one thing that I want to focus on is the role that, and Anna actually kind of spoke to the harms and the challenges that exist from these systems. And so I do think that there is a fundamental delta between AI technologies and other types of ways in which we've provided regulation in certain sectors previously. And so with that, I agree that we need to augment or look at existing legislation and figure out how AI is impacting those industries. And instead of having legislation that is specific to AI, figure out how we augment that and how that's complementary to this work. But that does leave a lot of systems and different types of contexts that don't get resolved through that process.
Thank you. And that turns me over to Mr. Shi. According to the website, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Working Group, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative that aims to bridge this gap between theory and practice on AI by supporting cutting-edge research and the applied activities of AI-related priorities. It includes 29 countries, and how could the work of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Working Group provide a framework for the implementation of the laws the governing that will be governing artificial intelligence, such as the AI Intelligence Data Act?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think the purpose of the group is to bring together world-renowned experts, policymakers around the table to actually think about the practical applications of artificial intelligence. One of the artifacts that just recently came out from the working group on the future of work was actually 10 policy recommendations about what we have identified with the International Labor Organization as the great unknown. So the idea that 8% of the working population going forward will be impacted in an unknown way by artificial intelligence, and there is an opportunity to act. So it's an incredible organization that brings stakeholders from around the world, and we discuss in very practical terms the way to apply legislation. So it would be very, very open to continuing to be consulted in this process, as well as help give concrete examples of how AI can be built responsibly and benefit humanity.
I'm interested in your comments, and some of the notes that I've made is digital slavery and your concerns about that. How do you think the impacts of AI will have on work, and how do you think that should be regulated in Canada?
So there are two aspects to consider. The first one is how it's impacting work today, and in Canada and beyond. So the first element, and then how will impact society and the place of work going forward. If we think about today, there are millions of people that actually work behind the scenes in AI systems to make them operate effectively. They are not protected under this law, nor are they protected under any legislation that's coming out on AI. So there's an opportunity to legislate the AI supply chain for what it is, a supply chain with millions of people working on it. In the second phase, the impact on workers going forward, there are a lot of unknowns around what will happen to workers, how their work will be influenced. And one of the advantages of the Global Partnership on AI is that we have both representatives from academia, industry, worker unions, as well as governments. And the statement that was put out was essentially, we need to put in place studies of the impact of AI on the future of work. We need to we need to invest in retraining. We need to invest in making sure that we're transitioning some roles. And we need to be aware that even most recently with the advent of generative AI, there already are economic impacts on low-skilled workers who will need to be retrained and given other opportunities. And so the future of work needs that. And the Global Partnership on AI has a policy brief, which is available online.
I think I have about 15 seconds left. You did provide an overview of regional and national initiatives. Which countries have the most robust approaches, and would you recommend amendments to the artificial intelligence legislation that we have here?
So the first amendment that I would recommend would be to have a disclosure on the supply chain to ensure that we can decide on the usage of ethical AI that does not have forced labor or child labor in it. And right now, the leading jurisdiction is the EU, where we see companies that we're working with in practice actually having higher standards than anywhere in the world and are forcing disclosure mechanisms both in the private sector. So that's where I would say, we should be looking at is the EU right now for legislation.
Merci, Monsieur Van Bynen.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Lemire, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to start with Ms. Cazovan. During your work with the Canadian government, you directed the development of the very first policy on artificial intelligence, the directive on the taking of automatic decisions. This imposes a certain number of requirements by the government of technologies, which assist someone or replace their judgment of human and include machine learning and predictive analysis. Among these requirements, there's a need to supply an advice when decisions are taken with an automated system and the existence of recourse for those who want to challenge these administrative decisions. So should we have this kind of notice in this kind of law?
One of the things that we did with the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems was recognizing that there are multiple different types of ways in which, or the context in which automated decision systems are being used, and recognizing that those have different types of categories of harms. And so if you have a reference in Annex C of the legislation, you'll see that then there's different requirements that exist for those different types of harms. One of the challenges that we had, though, when looking to implement it was that people were looking for what are then the standards or what's the bar that I need to meet that's acceptable. And unfortunately, that wasn't developed. And so that's what needs to happen now in order to address some of the concerns that you've raised, notification, other types of documentation requirements. That type of additional context is not only required through additional regulations that support the broader framework that ADA is, but then looking at what do you do in those contexts for different degrees of and categorizations of risk.
And in the case of recourse, to whom should the consumer refer to when they want to challenge an automated decision?
Lorsque les consommateurs contestent quelque chose, non seulement ils ont besoin d'avoir un avis, de recevoir un avis pour bien comprendre est-ce qu'un système a été utilisé, par exemple, mais il faudrait également qu'il y ait des recours possibles. Et ce sont différents types de mesures d'atténuation qui vont dépendre du contexte et qui va dépendre des systèmes, des risques et ainsi de suite, par rapport aux règles qui seront établies.
If I've understood clearly, this requires the evaluation of the impact of the algorithm for each system of automated decision making. So if you base yourself on this evaluation would lead to a classification going from one, the lowest impact, to far the highest level. So the results of this assessment must be made public and updated as a function of functionalities or the reach of the system. Why is it important that these systems be evaluated in terms of the algorithm impact?
La question clé que nous voulions aborder, on ne voulait pas trop réglementer. On ne voulait pas créer plus de surveillance ou de contrôle que nécessaire. On voulait qu'il y ait un équilibre entre l'innovation et la protection des gens qui utilisent ces systèmes. Donc, en reconnaissant qu'il n'y a pas différents enjeux et de risques. Il y a des risques différents, des enjeux différents par rapport aux systèmes différents. Et donc, nous voulions nous assurer qu'il y ait des mesures d'atténuation qui soient mises en place pour contrer cela.
Can you give me examples of some criteria used to determine the level of each system in terms of how it must be classified? And would it be useful to add this kind of requirement to Bill C-27?
Would love to see that. I think that what we see in the amendments with the different types of classes, so we have the 7 classes of potential impacts. I think that there's recognition in that there's different types of levels of harm that can exist within there. So by adding something in addition, almost like a matrix to say, okay, you have these different types of impacts that could occur in hiring, could occur in health, and then these are the different types of harms that could exist, and therefore these are the mitigations that are needed, is something that I definitely would recommend seeing. And then again, matching that, I think most importantly, to industry developed standards. One of the things that Bianca's referencing is the need, and other witnesses have, is the need for increased public participation in this process. Standards development processes do allow for that and accommodate for that. And so that's why I think that this is really important. And again, recognizing that we're not going to be able to put everything in black and white in any sort of legislation. And so having people be trained to understand what those harms are, how to look for them, and how to mitigate them is the point of having somebody responsible like a chief AI officer.
L'un des critères d'évaluation.
One of the criteria for the assessment of the impact of algorithms concerns an evaluation of the impact on rights, not only of individuals, but also communities. We've heard marginalized communities who are saying that harms that are individual should not be the only thing, but also harms that affect groups. So why should some of the text should be amended and ensure that this is necessary to be as precise and inclusive in the text of the bill?
Mitigations, as you're mentioning, dependent on the use of the system, both the technology, but then also the context in which it's being used will change. The harms will change. It could be an individual to a group to the organization itself. And so therefore, first of all, understanding what the harms are. So the work that I did at Responsible AI Institute was really building on the work that I did at Treasury Board, which was saying, okay, this is what the scope of a system is. We need to put something like a certification mark on it, like a good housekeeping symbol, LEED. And so that type of acknowledgement would require you to be able to identify what those harms are first and foremost, and therefore identify the different type of criteria or controls that you would need to go through in order to mitigate them for the individual or the group or organization, as I mentioned.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
Maybe I'll start with Mr. Shi, because he's virtual. There has been suggestions, not only by this panel, but others, that we scrap and start all over. Wondering if you have any opinion with regards to the content related to the Privacy Commissioner, whether we should actually, if there is a separation of the two major aspects of the bill here, whether you'd support continuation of the privacy work, or whether that should be potentially looked at as well. Then I'll go to the witnesses in person. Thank you.
I would say that, the AI Act in itself is extremely important. As was mentioned by other witnesses today, AI systems already have an impact on people's lives, and their development is just increasing in speed. So I would be very favorable to see legislation that at least sets a base framework, and that from there we can move forward. But ultimately, right now, the legislation is not complete, needs work, and needs to have additional amendments to ensure that it touches the whole AI supply chain, protects people throughout, both while it's being built and when it's being deployed.
Okay, so I'll maybe move to Ms. Casavin and then across the table there. Again, what I'm looking though for is if we do end up, not getting enough fixes to the AI component, and that starts over or is delayed, should we continue to progress with the privacy and the potential changes that are suggested there? Start with Ms. Casavin, please, and then across the table.
I actually believe that I'm a huge fan of the fact that this bill has, I know some people have said that it's a bolt-on, it was announced today, but I think it's an important bolt-on. And so one of the things that if ADA does not continue, there are privacy implications and consumer protection implications in relation to the use of AI. And so I would like to at least see those two components strengthened.
Thank you. To our next witness, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm not well located to comment on the privacy pieces of the bill.
Okay. Our final witness, please.
So just for the ADA should be separate. And in terms of, again, privacy, that's not my expertise either. So I stand beside my comment to remove ADA and proceed with the other two, whether the amendments are needed for that. Somebody else.
Okay, so this is interesting. I do want to ask about protection of labor law. If you could continue with regards to that, how would that best be done? Through commissioner, a special component in the labor ministry? I'm throwing this out in terms of what are some mechanics that we have around that you're seeking to see change?
So, I mean, as Ms. Wiley has said, I could give you so many examples right now about specific types of harms, real world implications, everything that's changing all the time. But I do really want to move and zoom out a little bit and talk about why labor is important to look at. So before getting into who can do this, it seems paradoxical to me to want agility in technologies that are so complex. We don't understand them. Most people don't. The black box is still there. Engineers don't understand them still to this day, right? So workers are being continuously impacted. And when I say impact, I mean negative impact and harmed. And I can, again, I submitted a brief to your committee with Dr. Renee Sieber, and we discussed those at length. You have multiple studies to look at for multiple years. I've been following SAMA for 5 years now, the company that is self-proclaimed ethical AI company. So when we look at who says is ethical and what is ethical, we should really question that as well. In my first 5 minutes, I said that the AI being a societal benefit is being shoved down our throats, and that is the case. We need digital literacy, we need AI literacy, but we know it's good and it's here to stay. I'm here to sometimes reject that. We should be able to ban AI when we need it. We should be able to listen to the workers and see what they want and what they think. What does their day-to-day job look like? Do they have enough breaks? Look at what's Amazon doing with basically micromanaging every millisecond of their lives. The factory workers are living I wouldn't say even in limbo space, but in hell. So how do we prevent that? And why not best go to a labor departments that know those strengths? So this is why I said it's not fit alone. Earlier was asked what is another agency that could do this? It cannot just be one, it has to be multiple. This is a team effort, and this is back to democracy and slowing it down a little bit and listening to the public, because we really don't know what the public wants, because the public wasn't really involved. So we really need to listen to labor organizations, departments that deal with labor everywhere in this country, and then also the workers themselves. This is why we cannot just have people in these rooms. We cannot just have this televised. We need to have people come to the people. So we need you to come to the people. We need to look at town halls. We need to look at offline methods. We need to look at different times and places to do public participation, because we really lived in the digitized world and we're saying we need to change everything for AI, as Ms. Wiley said before. No. AI needs to change for us.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vies.
Thank you to all the witnesses here today. I'm very concerned about this broken bill. I don't even know, as a legislator, we all understand around the table what's at stake here, but it's really disconcerting. For the second time since we started doing this bill, we're receiving these massive packages of information that completely changed the bill in front of us by the minister. And I'm saying, Minister, why did you screw up so badly? And where the heck was your department for years? Where were you? Last meeting, I asked a number of experts about whether Industry Canada even has the capacity, or the government of Canada has the capacity. One of the first things I raised in Parliament, actually, when I got elected, I was on the HUMA committee, and it was to review the data systems for human resources, for the Department of Human Resources, because they were not capable, because they were still using a binary code method from the 1970s. I think that's still in effect today. The government of Canada has proven that generally they get a lot of things wrong and they're not up to date in the 21st century. And I am so apprehensive about giving this department any more power with something that most experts are still contemplating about how they're going to get it right. That said, I think despite the minister's incompetence on this, his heart may be partly in the right place, and that he's trying to bring forward amendments and he's trying to do something to fix his own mess. But it is really scary that he's that incompetent that we're just getting thrown this information. So sorry for that rant. But part of me is thinking now, Tony, you and I both come from the Dutch community, and in our culture, it's about being direct, and I know you appreciate that as well. Thank you, my friend. In the first part of the bill, that's true, Dutch people are direct. And Tony's even born in Holland. So in the first part of the bill, we talked a lot about enshrining a fundamental right to privacy for children. And what we got from the minister were 7 areas where he doesn't believe that AI should be used now. I don't see anything in there related to children, and that's kind of concerning. Did any of you follow the debates we've had so far about a fundamental right to privacy for kids? Okay, so Ashley, you're Miss Castlevan, you're shaking your head in response. Yes.
I've heard the debates that have been pursued.
Okay,
yes.
So I don't know. Like, I'm in a position where I might get the Liberal members of this committee may make a decision with the Bloc Québécois to support this going through. I'm not sure where we're going to land on that, and we're openly having this deliberation about whether this part of the bill deserves to go forward. That's where we are right now in good faith. That said, if it does go through, is it worth committee members looking at some of the other amendments that we're going to be putting forward in the first part of the bill, like really enshrining some protections for kids? I am so concerned about the innocent. I have a 10-month-old daughter and a 4-year-old son and an 8-year-old son. I am so concerned about their innocence and the manipulation. And the bill, I will admit, does address psychological harms, but 1 or 2 clauses I don't think is good enough when it relates to a data-driven economy that impacts kids from birth to death in today's day and age. So maybe if you could comment on that a bit.
Sure. Actually, the reason why I included my personal note was because I've heard your line of questioning, and it is something that's concerning, and it's not something that I typically speak to, but it was quite surprising having the experience working in this space. As I mentioned, almost a decade, which is scary, to really think about the evolution of different types of technologies and then therefore the societal impact that they have. And working inside of government, I was also nodding my head when you were mentioning some of the challenges that exist internally. I saw them up close and personal, and definitely, like all organizations, have concerns when we're using old technologies to try and fix modern solutions. That said, the reality is that it does take a significant amount of time. So from a children's perspective, the fact that I had kids recently just completely opened my aperture in terms of the harms, and it made it more real and visceral than I could have ever imagined. Everything was abstract before. So I not only think that that should be included, I do think that when we see potential new classes that get added into these amendments of high impact systems, it would be nice to see something related to protection of youth, similar to what we're seeing south of the border in the U.S.
Okay, so Mr. Shi mentioned in his comments earlier that the relationship between AI generative models and child labor. If we had, say, a clause in the AI portion of the bill that excluded any data that was created by children in third world countries, would that do? What impact would that have?
One, it would be.
Have a.
Oh, go ahead, Shi.
Oh, I was asking Ms. Castlevan.
Yeah, I think that it would be not only nice to see. I think that one of the challenges, though, with all of these systems is that they're trained on data. I know you've talked about this lots on this committee, so I won't regurgitate it too much. However, what's important to know is that often the supply chain is not transparent. So knowing where that data comes from is quite difficult. So to know that it comes from or was collected by children, I think you're needing to solve a more fundamental problem of transparency in the supply chain of data collection practices, which I think should be addressed in deeper concern in this bill as well.
Mr. Chair, do I
Thank you, Mr. Viz. That's all the time. I'll just allow if Mr. Shi, you had something to add to this.
Yeah, just to add that it is common practice within the AI development world to actually detail instructions for both data collection, data annotation, and by including any reference to child or forced labor, that would have a tremendous impact in making sure that that would be eradicated, given that it would be something that would be included specifically in the instructions given to companies who are operating around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Sorbara.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everyone. And thank you for your respective testimony on AI. It's fascinating, very complex, and it's given a lot of us as MPs and not specifically subject matter experts a lot to chew on. I do wish to go to the gentleman on the virtual. You mentioned several times, I believe it's Alexandra. Yes, you mentioned several times the AI continuum, and the idea of my notes here: data collection, engineering, annotation, and the AI supply chain. If you can just elaborate on that point. But your first point was that we should go forward with the bill, and I want you to just, if you can comment on both aspects, that'd be great.
Yes. So essentially, when we look at artificial intelligence, there are many steps in that. The first step is collecting data. So collecting data for an AI system. The second step is annotating that data. So for example, in this image here, you see a nose, you see eyes. There's somebody annotating that. Then there's a feedback loop where that data is enriched. So it goes through a software model, and ultimately the outputs of that are then revalidated by a human. That's packaged into a proof of concept that's oftentimes launched, and then it becomes a product that's used by consumers or in the business context. So that's the whole supply chain. Right now, this legislation is only geared around the outputs. And so we're missing all of the work done by humans to actually create the AI systems. I think that's important to have a law in place because we need to start regulating the outputs as much as we need to regulate the supply chain. My recommendation.
I'm afraid, well, it's actually the whole system because it's not just Mr. Shi, it's, we're back. Mr. Shi, if I can ask you to maybe go back 1 minute in time, the system froze.
We can't hear you.
And now we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
now it works.
Essentially, I think it's important to have legislation in place because we need to start protecting citizens that are interacting with AI systems. But we also need to hold accountable companies that are building AI systems and ensure that they're not using practices that are against Canadian values in their supply chain.
I do want to interject because, and you did say one thing, but I'm going to move to another witness. Which I found fascinating. You made the linkage between the AI supply chain and human rights, and then you also mentioned the race to the bottom on lack of worker rights when it comes to the AI supply chain. And I would love to follow up in a more in-depth conversation on that. Ashley, your comment on what compliance would look like in this AI world. Can you elaborate on that? Because we know governance within an organization, any type of organization is very important, and any type of service or product that's provided is important. And when I think of compliance, I'm trying to wrap my head about in a compliance in an AI world. What is that and how should it look like?
You're not the only one. It's something that's, I think, quite complicated. And again, it's one of the notes that came in the amendments was related to the role of auditing within the commissioner's office. I think that something that I'd like to see is more proactive use of auditing to ensure compliance, as opposed to the powers of the commissioner to go out and when there's something that percolates that's problematic enough that then they would require an audit. It would be good to see that. And so how that's done typically, kind of like a financial audit, you just require those proactively every year with companies. In this case, one of the things, again, that we need to understand better is what is the scope of an AI system? Based on that, what are those harms? Therefore, how do you comply with that? So what does that good look like? And again, doing that through a public process. And then from there, requiring third-party audits, again, in a similar way that we have professionalized auditors in financial services to do the same thing.
You know, as someone that spent many years in the financial services, domestic and globally, we depend on audited financial statements to do our job, and hopefully 99 times out of 100, they're accurate, right? And so forth. Are we looking at the same type of world as we go forward?
So if I have my way, yes, I would love that. However, the one addition that I'd like to note here, because one of the things that people talk about is, as you would know, financial audits are lengthy and very expensive. However, there's a lot of tools that we can use to expedite the evaluation of these systems now. And recognizing that they're changing so rapidly, it's really important for us to use and leverage those tools so that those audits are not only expedited, but they're also accurate at time of that use and for purposes of also ongoing monitoring.
You're out of time, Mr. Sorbara, but I'll just yield myself a little bit of time for a follow-up question to Mr. Shi. I'm just trying to understand what's the scale of the issue you're hoping for Parliament to address. when it comes to the exploitative labor used in the AI supply chain, because I'm just thinking out loud, but I just watched today the Google DeepMind Gemini prototype that came out, and it seems to me like maybe that ship has sailed and already AI has gone to the point where you would think it's not that labor intensive. So I'm just trying to understand what's the scale.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what I would say is, firstly, while AI systems look very impressive to consumers, millions of people on a daily basis are working behind the scenes to make them work. And that spans from our interactions with social media to automated decision-making systems. The scope of what I'm asking for, is very simple. It's by having a disclosure mechanism in the law that requires companies to give information about the data that they collected and how they collected it. We essentially ensure that millions of people around the world that are annotating daily and interacting with AI systems in the back end are protected from exploitative processes and procedures. Right now, nothing is in place in any jurisdiction in the world. And so right now, this is a far west, and nobody is protecting these people. And these are youth in Pakistan. These are women in Kenya. These are vulnerable Canadians that are trying to, have a side job to make a little bit more money. And in all of these circumstances, they have nothing protecting them.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Shi, I'd like to continue with you. Yesterday, Radio-Canada presented a article on artificial intelligence in the service of war. They were referring to the Gospel program, which was better at targeting targets related to Hamas for the Israeli army. And this technology increased the number of civilian casualties, according to experts, because there was less human interaction behind each decision that was made before moving to the offensive action. So is there a kind of a slippage of AI, and how can we really frame those practices to save human lives? It's an excellent question. First of all, I want to say that I have no experience in artificial intelligence used for war and defense. I can only bring comments as a citizen who knows a bit about the field. But I think there has to be a very strong framework which takes into account rules of war that are already established. These are used in wars, unfortunately, and they make a lot of victims. So we have to be aware of the risk. We have to take measures to structure it. It's out of my field of expertise, but I think you're raising an important point. Yes, AI will be used in war situations. And we already have an issue with the system. The sound is no longer working. I don't know if Alexandre Shi, Brian Massey, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, you can continue. So we're involved with the work of the World Partnerships on AI. I think you're very useful to help us demystify all the problems that AI can bring. I give you another example. The protection of our democratic institutions, for example. This week, here in Parliament, we had a committee that received more than 19,600 amendments at the Natural Resources Committee from the Conservative Party, to not name it. And that seems that it would have been generated by AI to create so many amendments in such a short period of time. So we would like to block institutions to AI. Or we want to harm our democratic institutions through AI. So how can we protect our democratic institutions from these possibly Trumpist actions? So without making a comment on what actually happened, I can say that generative AI, that's taking more and more space in our discussions these days can generate texts that seem as plausible as those produced by a human being. So there's clearly a risk to our democracy and also a risk to interactions that people have with various systems. Can they determine if it's a human or not? No, they can't. So you're raising a very important issue to be able to have a marker that will show if something has been produced by an IA system, or an AI system rather, and also a way for a consumer or someone interacting with those systems to know that they're speaking with a system generated by AI and not a human being. So these are essential to the protection of our democracy and protection against disinformation that can arise from these sources that will increase exponentially with the new systems coming in. We're just at the beginning of this, so we absolutely have to have a way of identifying AI and to determine if we're interacting with a system or with a person. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Massé.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Wiley, you didn't get a chance to get in the last conversation. So let me ask you this. If we had an AI commissioner or a data commissioner, whatever it might be called, would the model of the privacy commissioner or an independent like that be something that we should be looking at or towards? And second that, or maybe you have another suggestion, looking at how do we bring some independence accountability to the table here that would also be empowered.
I just want to go back to my remark about making the third the third time of the same mistake we saw with privacy and data protection, which is to treat these topics as objects that are independent from the rest of the world as it exists. We've seen the failure that thinking like this has gotten us to because, well, we talk about privacy a lot. What we're dealing with is a deeply privatized space where the control and power of the infrastructures, particularly with AI, never mind with data and software, they're privately held. So if we think about our failures in access to justice for things like privacy and data protection, we think about the failures for this sort of a model, it's never about should we do it or not with privacy or data protection. It's always the how. If we want to turn the corner into a different world so that we have control over technologies, we have to talk about them in context. So for me, I go back to who is the minister in charge of XYZ sector, who is in charge of making sure forestry is operating a certain way, environmental protections are operating a certain way, cars are operating a certain way, and go from there every time. Because if we keep scaffolding more and more complexity, more and more compliance, more and more of these sort of complexities out into the sky, it doesn't serve justice. We have a fundamental access to justice problem as it stands right now. How many people have the time and energy to file a complaint with the privacy commissioner? What is the profile of someone? What is the demographic of someone who can bring that kind of a complaint forward? And in the same way that we're talking today about how would you know if you've been harmed by artificial intelligence? It is in some cases, recently heard this concept like asbestos. It's in things where you don't know it's there. So how are you who are you going to go and ask to hold accountable? If you get hit by a car, there's a clearly accessible track of where you go deal with that problem. I do not understand why we think it's a good idea to build an entirely new construct when we have a perfectly good physical and material world, a perfectly good set of governance standards, and that's a place where we have public power. So to me, the only people that benefit from scaffolding all this additional complexity are private interests. And in a democracy, at this point in time, we're 30 years in, public power has to be increased. So do I want to see a privacy commissioner for AI? No. I don't want to see a new regime for AI.
So you want to build within the actual departments themselves, is that correct then?
That's correct. And guess what's going to happen? It will surface the harms that right now we're talking about in abstractions. And I'm sorry, everyone, I cannot believe we're keeping doing this. This is not how the world works. You have to talk about specificity. That is how the law works. The law is where, when, who, what happened. That's how justice works. You don't work in the abstract. I'm sorry to have to keep bringing us back to this point, but why don't we build out from where we have functioning? The majority of our government is pre-existing. Work from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you very much, Mr. Généreux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. In Quebec, you say, I've just had it. I'm an ass. I'm on my ass. Thank you. I'm apologizing to the interpreters, but Ms. Wiley, you're giving us a lesson, a very interesting lesson. We have a bill that's been on the table for nearly 2 years that was evaluated, was created by public servants here, officials in Ottawa, with some politicians who did the work to create, or to try and create, a law that would come and take care of a problem that you don't really see. Really, we already have all these existing laws. We just have to work sector by sector to correct things that will be, or elements that we associated with AI. Here at the committee, we carried out studies on the blockchain, on the automobile industry, the right to repair, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're telling us today is take this away. It's not going to provide any useful results. And redo the studies you carried out before and on other laws and see what covers AI, because it already exists in all those sectors. So that's a question for you. And then my other question is for, I'll call you by your first names, because I can't pronounce the name, Anne and Ashley. What is your impression, relating to Madame Bianca's position?
With supporting the industry of AI. I just want to be very clear about that. But it, to me, is stunningly disingenuous to use fear, safety, harm reduction, human rights protection, and more to say that that's the reason for this bill, which is why I was asking, what is this bill actually doing? And I think if we were to stop and go back to the start and say, what are the sector-specific harms we're seeing? How did we deal with them with software? Banking. I mean, take any sector. They're not starting from scratch. They've had to deal with data. They've had to deal with privacy. They've had to deal with software. There are harms all over the place from software. We're not looking at those. So this is also not even coherent to the last 30 years of tech harms. So what I'm saying is, you go to the people, and again, it's the only people that we should be talking to haven't been included in this process. They're the ones who could tell you about the problems, because right now everybody's talking in generic terms.
Non, je suis d'accord avec vous. D'ailleurs,
I agree with you. And we know it's kind of Tuesday, the Third World War was announced. It was said to be technological. So to avoid eventual problems, should we have something like that's just been being put in place in Europe and elsewhere in the world?
Okay. It's okay? Yeah. Thank you. So to build on Bianca's point, I think we need to regulate AI. We just need to slow down, so we can't move fast and break things with regulation. Okay. So again, because AI is being regulated, but it's private regulation. It's self-regulation, and that's not working. Mr. Xi already said that in his first 5 minutes, and we need something different, and we need it to be like the EU in the way that it needs to be both public and private sector. So, and it cannot be centralized. I insist, because it's too much at stake to keep all of the power in one agency. And I'm going to actually move on to say it can also just be the OPC. It cannot just be the privacy commissioner, because AI is more than privacy. And AI is also about privatization. And what we see right now is the risk of regulatory capture, because every time there's a new summit being done, like in the UK at Bletchley Park, you had the major governments get together and announce, including ours, and announce collaborations with the top firms. Now we have the usual suspects, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and then the new people, the new kids on the block. But it cannot be that. So again, this isn't about perfection at all. It's that the process to get here, 1.5 years of almost no, again, zero public consultations, participation, understanding, even when we, as Bianca has said, we do have examples, specific examples of harms over and over again. So we do need to make sure that AI is regulated. We can use our imagination to do that with law.
So 30 seconds, Ashley.
For sure. So thank you. I think I've shared repeatedly that I don't think that AI is one monolithic thing. I do think that it needs to be broken down into sector-specific regulation. I think what ADA does is it provides a framework that then is dependent on other types of sector-specific regulation. There's no contesting that how this was done is problematic. There needs to be more public consultation. I was really happy to see in the amendments that at least it speaks to what was heard and then how that's being addressed. I think if we just put that aside, that's for you guys to debate kind of the process around this. But I think that personally, it's very important to have regulation around AI systems. I've seen and experienced by doing a lot of interventions with civil society organizations, harms that are occurring. And I don't think that actually rules are just leaving it up to self-regulation from companies to say, we're doing the best that we can do is going to prompt the appropriate behavior. I think legislators need that, and we need to be able to set the homework too. Like, we can't say, you go write your test and then you check mark it yourself. I think it's very important that we, as civil society organizations, in combination with industry, in combination with government, in combination with academics, write what those tests are, the standards that I'm talking to, and then use that to assess industry.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you very much, Mr. Généreux. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. It's a great juxtaposition of perspectives that we have, and we've been hearing from, I think, a diverse cross-section of perspectives during this this undertaking, which is, I think we can all admit, a very big and important piece of legislation that is complex, challenging for all of us, both as legislators, but also I'm not sure that any one stakeholder has the full view on how this should move forward. So I think it's good to have conversations like this that are push-pull. There's lots of challenges here, and I appreciate that. Look, I wanted to just say, first off, this bill was initiated due to recommendations from the Minister's AI Advisory Committee, and I think which consisted of industry experts, and the Facebook whistleblower, I think, was also part of that context that led to this work. I'd also say that, from my perspective, the consultations of over 300 stakeholders have included universities, institutes, companies, industry groups and associations, privacy experts, and consumer protection groups. I think maybe there's some other categories, but those are the ones that I could see. So I have the list here. It has been provided publicly and to committee members. I would also say that just in terms of the way that parliamentary practice goes, usually amendments aren't provided in advance during a study where you hear from witnesses. The government has provided the amendments in advance. We've also heard from some witnesses which is, there's varying perspectives on what process should look like. But we've heard from some witnesses that tabling a sort of framework piece of legislation was a good way to get something on the order paper and then undertake a lot of consultation to inform amendments to that. And some people feel like that process is very justified. Anyway, I just wanted to start with those things off the hop. as just statements. Ms. Castlevin, I found your point that you've made, and we've heard it from some other witnesses on balancing innovation and protection. I think that what I've heard anyway is that having responsible guardrails for AI will allow people to benefit from it while protecting them at the same time. And I know that's a challenge, like with any legislation that we work on, that is a balancing act that we're constantly confronting. So could you speak to, how will we know if we get that balance right from your perspective?
No one's harmed. It's really difficult to address that. I think, one, we need to try. We need to recognize that just leaving it to the free market is probably not going to result in the conclusion that we want to see. We're seeing there's an amazing resource called the AI Incident Database. If you haven't seen it, it tracks various different types of harms that exist. I'd love for that to be compiled and then we better understand so we can articulate, I think, in more common ways what those are. It's a difficult question to answer in absence of having any of these in place. I think that the requirement for collecting data through a commissioner's office that would have those use cases reported is important to do.
Ms. Castlevin, from your perspective, do you think we're moving too fast on this legislation and this work? Because we've heard from quite a few witnesses earlier this week that we're in fact behind and we need to move faster.
Yeah.
That's what I've been hearing a lot from stakeholders. Some maybe disagree with that, but what would you say?
With all respect to my fellow witnesses, I think we're moving way too slowly on this.
Okay. So, and I mean, I understand the gravity of this because there's a large, well, there's many different risks of harm.
Yeah.
I think, and it's hard to understand those without contextualizing them. I think Ms. Wiley made that point quite well. But how do we, do you support, I heard Bianca's points, which are essentially seem to be leaning towards a really decentralized approach to this, whereas I think the approach we're opting to take is to have a very central piece of legislation that is going to regulate all activity to some degree. Obviously, that will need to probably evolve and change. We know the pace that AI is evolving is so quick that it's hard to keep up with. So, but from your perspective, I guess my question is really, it's a tough question, I guess, to answer. But
yeah, I think there's kind of two key points here. One is that we really need to have one point of accountability. It's difficult to, there's a lot of interoperability between different types of AI systems. And so knowing exactly, okay, this is going to fall into transportation might be very clear if it's an automated vehicle. But if it's a healthcare system, it might have issues related to consumer protection, or it might have issues related to the health and safety of somebody. And so breaking those apart is difficult. And so what I think this bill does is requires those different types of regulators and regulations to work one in hand with each other. There's also then gaps that exist. And maybe then third, I would add that having like I said in my opening statements, the professionalization of an individual that would be responsible and accountable for the governance of these systems, I think is something that then you have some consistency across all of these different regulations.
it's interesting, Chair, because it's not uncommon for us these days to talk about the big overarching issues and wanting to take an all of government or all of economy or all of society approach. And I think most people understand that governments have to integrate across ministries and really tackle these problems together.
Yeah.
We see that with the fight against climate change. But a lot of the legislation still sits within a ministerial accountability and falls within a minister's mandate and role, right? So I think it's not uncommon to have central legislation that is in one ministry but then still impacts the work right across government ministries. And I think that's what we might see in this process. Is that sort of what you're hoping to see?
Right. So the requirement of harmonization across different ministries, I think, is really important. And I would also flag the requirement of harmonization across both within Canada, so interprovincially, as well as provincial to national government and local government as well, I think is quite important. And then also this bill, as we know with the amendments, addresses international harmonization, with Canada playing a crucial role with the EU we've heard a lot about today, but we haven't talked about even the US's executive order and the implications of that.
Chair, I think I'm out of time, but thanks for your leniency.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Williams has the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Ashley, I want to follow up with you on a couple of things. This has been great discussion, by the way, especially on ADA today. We talk about the value of public and private data, especially for ADA, and where this bill right now exempt that. Right now, under this bill, DND, CSIS, CSC are exempt from ADA, and there's provision for any federal or provincial department or agency to be exempted via regulation. And that's entire federal government and Crown Corps are exempt. When we talk about ADA as a whole in this bill, is that in your opinion, is that right that we've exempted all of the public government from ADA as a whole?
Right. So that's why we worked on the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems at Treasury Board Secretariat. That's the purview of management systems that Treasury Board is responsible and accountable for. Should that be raised to an act level, so similar to where we see PIPEDA and a Privacy Act that governs how public sector services work? Yes. One thing that I would like to see is alignment, though, between requirements between ADA and the directive, or subsequent type of policy that would come out from TBS, recognizing that automated decision-making systems aren't the only types of AI. And one of the things that also doesn't address or is out of scope is national security systems, as you mentioned. So I do think that additional provisions would need to be made for that.
So I guess the premise of this, though, and just for everyone listening, right now, PIPEDA, the first part of C27, it does not cover public, but to your point, you brought that up. We have the Privacy Act, which, could be argued we should have been studying this at the exact same time. So in ADA, the point I'm making is there is nothing out there that exists, especially not in ADA, that addresses AI in the public sector. And we've talked a lot about that. So I guess I'm trying to get a better handle on your recommendation. Should have this been included with ADA right now, or is this a whole other act that you're looking at that we should have included with this?
Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems does, though, oversee government's use of AI systems. And one other additional thing is that we should again, ensure alignment between these two for purposes of the fact that most government departments aren't actually developing their own AI systems. They're purchasing them. And so ensuring that procurement rules are then the same as ADA, I think, is quite important.
Except that privacy and looking at an act that would govern data of AI and AI as a whole would certainly look over that. Procurement would only look at other sections like Investment Canada Act or other acts. It's interesting to me that that's not in there, and I think that is a glaring hole that I've just noticed today. I want to switch to either Ms. Wiley or Ms. Braninescu. I really focus a lot on opposition, on competition, and we look at big bossy conglomerates that exist within the system. Ms. Wiley, you made an interesting comment that this seems to be going forward only for industry because capital is looking for a place to go. Well, the examples you gave that it seems to be benefiting are Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. They're big bossy conglomerates. They're huge companies that are only looking to get bigger and obviously to benefit from this. When it comes to competition, we want, and this is the industry committee, we want small, scrappy competitors and companies to be able to enter the space and to ensure that they can compete and enter the market. I know, and I agree with your arguments on where we are with data. Let's talk about a new, if we started new, how do we create competition? Where do we start in terms of making sure that we get all the players in that, not just the big people, but some of the smaller ones included with the discussions?
Just two comments on this. One, it's partially why if we had a proper public engagement and started from the beginning, you'd have to map the infrastructural assets that make up artificial intelligence. There is no AI without big tech. Full stop. You can't spin it up in your garage. You can't go do your little software company, because code is available to you. That's not how this industry works. And this is what I mean, that I'm concerned about the lack of homework that has been done to make sure we're starting from a place of material, physical, infrastructural reality and how it relates to this industry. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to say, which relates back to the conversation we were having about centralization or decentralization, not only does the Canadian government not have much clout in terms of telling what the heart of this infrastructure, what it can and can't do, when we think about privacy legislation, if we start up here with an umbrella and say privacy, and then we look and try to, how does that work in different sectors, we might know what that looks like sector to sector. If your umbrella is called artificial intelligence what? What are we exactly trying to do if your umbrella is called artificial intelligence? Are we trying to use it everywhere? I just want to keep returning us to the fact that we're having a conversation within a frame that does not track to the reality of how this industry is set up, nor how our pre-existing legislation is set up. So I just want to say how little companies might come in on this. The startups are hoping no one's going to ask about their 2 or 3 year revenue, because all startups have to do is show scale. That's how the venture capital industry works, is you just have to show that your thing is getting big. You don't have to show that it's making money. That's how similar it is to a casino. And that's why I think the fact that we're building into this sector without looking at the consequences on the rest of our whole economy is also a grave error.
And just to add to Pianka's point, I want to take us to 4 years ago when Element AI was heavily invested in by public and private sector. It's a case of Canada and Quebec that we just do not speak about anymore. To Bianca's points about who owns the infrastructure and who owns the data center versus the data sets. So again, without big tech, there may not be AI, but I would argue without the military, there would be no AI, because that's where it comes from, like most technology. So Element AI was a darling of Canada. And in the end, the space that we had and the regulatory framework for competition did not allow it to survive. What happened? It was acquired by ServiceNow, a Silicon Valley company, who does, frankly, worker surveillance. So I would just like to know exactly, when we move on to this new ideation of what would more shared prosperity and competition look like across MSMEs and big companies, to reflect on the failures in AI in Canada within the industry space, and see where did we go wrong and what happened to the massive amounts of funding and government spending to prop up our industry with all the AI research expertise we have, with all of the centers of excellence, before we would even go and ideate to how competition should look like. We should reflect on what happened, especially with Element AI.
You're out of time, Mr. Williams. Before I turn to Mr. Gahir, I'll give myself just one small question. Madame Branducescu, you just mentioned, and it's something we've never heard so far on the committee, that you said there would be no AI without the military. Would you mind expanding on that?
Certainly. So I've heard over and over again witnesses talk about scale, but not violence at scale. And that's what we say. We see how AI is being used in the military. But we have to go back to something that I spoke about when the Parliament did a study on facial recognition technology. And that's companies that are defense contractors that now are spun up as AI and data analytics firms. A famous one is Palantir. You may know of them. Palantir is interesting because it started in defense, but now it's everywhere. The NHS in the UK just gave them a contract of millions of dollars, despite so much opposition to it. Palantir promised that the UK government would be in charge of the data of the people, but in the end, it's not so. And you have really past examples of Palantir being abusing human rights, because let's bring that into the context. And for example, an Amnesty USA study showed how in the US government to plan mass arrests of nearly 700 people and the separation of children from their parents, causing irreparable harm. And so back to the military, what does this mean? Well, the military is the biggest funder of AI, and what we see is rapid, exacerbating killing at scale. And so when we are racing to move forward with making more AI and make it faster and creating faster regulation, just so we can justify to ourselves that we use it, we are not thinking about what should we ban? What should we decommission?
Thank you, Madam Randucescu. I'll have to cut you off here. I was just interested in more information on that. Thank you for the examples, because to my knowledge, like most of the biggest players in AI remain in the private sector, but thank you for the examples you've provided. And we have bells ringing, colleagues, which means we do need unanimous consent to continue. And I'm looking around the room to see if we have it, given that we're going to about 35 hours of voting. Thank you to our friends on the left side. So do I have unanimous consent to continue at least until, I'd say, 10 minutes more? Because
sure.
Yeah,
I'm never usually accused of being on the left side.
No, that's true. That's true. But you are to my left, Mr. Perkins, but definitely to my right politically. So I'll now yield the floor to MP Gaillard.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their testimony before the committee. My first question is for Ms. Cassavan. We know that the Minister has provided recent amendments to the committee to clarify the definition and scope of high-impact systems by outlining 7 distinct classes of such systems. Do you think that's a good way of proceeding? Does it provide enough sufficient clarity, or do you think there would be a better model?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I do think, as we've discussed a lot today, that it's a good start to understand that AI is not one thing, that breaking them down into different types of contexts and use is important. I think, though, that it's a limited list. I get that the concept is to continue to add to it and to have a process. I do think that maintaining an inventory of such classes could be difficult. And also, as I mentioned earlier, recognizing that there's different degrees of risk that could exist within those classes. And so trying to identify a way similar to that we did with the directive to break that down into what are we actually trying to achieve from each of the mitigation measures for those classes of systems?
Great. So do you have a proposed system that would be better, or would it be...
As I mentioned, I think kind of a matrix of both the contexts that are being used with then recognition of what a standard high-risk assessment would be, so that can be, again, I would draw your attention to Appendix C of the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems, where that's broken down into 4 different types of impact is what we had called it, but then different types of compliance requirements would be related to that. I also think that, again, the key word there is a standard for an impact assessment to understand what that risk would actually be.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No.
I was wondering if you had...
I have lots of opinions about this.
We also know... and this is generally for the committee as well. Maybe Mr. Shi can answer this one. But the government proposed amendments to ADA include a series of tasks to be completed before a general purpose or high impact artificial system can be made commercially viable, including assessment of adverse effects and a test of effectiveness of measures to mitigate the risk of harm or biased results. What do you think about these new obligations that the government wants to impose on people that want to make AI systems available?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer really quickly and then go to, sorry,
No,
we were looking at each other in the room, apologies. I think that what's really important is that there is a governance process that's put in place before those systems are developed. And like I mentioned, that's part of this assurance or audit function that would exist. I also think, as I mentioned in my opening statements, that having an accountable person, so something like a chief AI officer, would help work through that process in a consistent and therefore meaningful way.
Mr. Shi, if you want to take it.
Yeah, I would just add, I think it's a good starting place, but especially Clause 7.1a, respecting the usage of data, I think there would be advantage to include a disclosure mechanism to be able to understand how the data was labeled and how it was used. And I think that would be something that would have an incredibly positive impact both on the creation of the models and their implementation. So I think it's a good starting place, but I would include at that, it's specifically in that clause of the amendments that were proposed, a specific disclosure requirement around data labeling and annotation.
Quickly, we can't know how these things will be used. We can write systems all day where we say, this is where we think it'll be used, this is what we think the risks and harms could be. But it's a tool. You can't tell anybody how to use a tool. If they use it a certain way that's not in your categorization, you have a problem. So this model, to me, I just going to keep bringing us back to deployment. We can write beautiful laws with intricacy all day long, but you can't control the use of these products in operations and deployment. So I just don't want us to talk like how we think we should organize it is the most important thing. The most important thing is what's going to happen in reality.
So, Ms. Cassavan, do you think there should be a compliance audit maybe before the AI systems are placed on the market?
Yes.
No?
Yeah, I do, and I think to a certain specification, so that's why a standard would be good. So the analog could be a fair trade symbol or LEED, like I mentioned previously. And so thinking about different types of standards that one would need to meet in order for that to go on the market, I think should be a precondition for high-risk systems.
Great. No, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses.
Monsieur Gaillard. Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Gaillard. Mr. Lemire. Madame Brandușescu, excuse my pronunciation, when you came to the Standing Committee on Privacy and Ethics, you talked about the use of AI in the sector, public sector. You said that technology of facial recognition and other AI requires participation of the private sector in public governance. What do you mean by the participation of the public sector in public governance? Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, so facial recognition technology, as we know, hopefully is the low-hanging fruit of dangerous AI. It seems like harm is kind of getting out of context. I will call it dangerous because that's what it is. And yet we need to have these levels of imagination of banning certain technologies. And facial recognition technologies should be banned. The public sector can make that choice. It can make that choice because it is responsible to the public in the end. The private sector, as it stands, is responsible to the shareholder and the business model of making more money. This is how capital is working. This is what we're seeing. That's not the job of the government. So again, when I say that ADA should be out and reflected upon as a public and private, that is exactly what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about facial recognition technology used by law enforcement, national security, in IRCC, in immigration. Now it can be used in Services Canada, maybe in the CRA, the way that the IRS wanted to use facial recognition for doing taxes. So again, these technologies aren't domain bound. Just like Palantir went from the military to health, FRT works the same way, facial recognition technology. So the public sector needs to be involved to be publicly accountable for its people. And I really am coming back to Bianca's points about democracy. And participation is messy, but we need to participate in a way that there is dissent, there is discussion and non-compliance across the board and consensus, because it is important to make sure that these technologies will no longer be used because they are too dangerous. We saw what happened with Clearview AI. That is a privacy case, but it's also a mass surveillance case. And besides the obvious, which is the dangers and harms it has done to so many marginalized groups.
Et on voit tous les dérapages.
Thank you. We can see everything that's happened in Ireland and China also. Thank you. Mr. Massé, is he still there? Maybe he had to leave for the vote. So that would end the round we were on, given that we have very little time to go to the House. It will end our meeting for today. Oh, Mr. Massé, I thought we'd lost you. The floor's...
Mr. Chair, it's okay. We should wrap up. It's getting tight.
I agree. I do too. So I want to thank all of our witnesses for enlightening us this afternoon. Thank you so much. I want to thank the analysts. Merci aux interprètes. Merci à notre greffière. Et sur ce, la rencontre est ajournée.
Meeting adjourned.